Hello and welcome to the WTO Forum. Today's dialogue is about aid for trade. Is about how we use development aid to translate trade opportunities into trade realities on the ground. And to do that, we have with us an actor on the ground, Frank Matsaert from TradeMark East Africa, CEO of TradeMark East Africa, small organization in East Africa funded by development agencies across the world who is trying to leverage trade for prosperity on the ground. Frank, welcome to the WTO.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
First question is, we know that TradeMark East Africa has been a very ardent follower of the Aid for Trade initiative that the WTO launched back in 2005. What does Aid for Trade mean for TradeMark East Africa?
Well, I think it's worth saying, first of all, that the Aid for Trade banner has been something that really inspired us to create TradeMark. And I've been sort of working for some time to establish TradeMark and get it moving. So I think Pascal Lamy and the DG's call to arms on Aid for Trade was something that really inspired us. So it's worth saying that as a starting point. I think it's a very important for us because obviously it provides the whole foundation for the work that we do in terms of trying to understand the needs of our partners, get behind a partnership approach where there's a real win-win outcome, and very much think about how we can create a harmonized platform for donors to really go at Aid for Trade for scale. And you say that we're quite a small organization. We are in numbers, but our budget is $500 million. That's a fairly considerable investment for Aid for Trade. I think the other thing that, watching the development of the Aid for Trade agenda is really the focus on results has been something that's really helped us. And we've taken a very, very pragmatic, results-oriented way of doing things. And we've tried to create a very special purpose organization to really deliver the Aid for Trade gains on the ground. And for us, that really means growing prosperity through trade, quite simply. And I think that that's really what the WTO has in mind when they created the Aid for Trade concept.
That's exactly right. And you focused on impact, results, outcomes.
Yeah.
What would you say has TradeMark East Africa changed on the ground? Because you're right, this initiative is great, but it's only as great as it changes realities on the ground.
I think that's right. And, in the end, trade has got to benefit people. And in the end, it's about jobs, increasing incomes and increasing economic opportunities and deepening trade, deepening exports. So, let me give you some examples. I mean, we have quite a big portfolio now. It's grown a lot. We have around 200 projects split across 6 countries and 7 different locations. Mm-hmm. So really, it's quite a complex portfolio now. We're only three years old, and that's worth noting. So the kind of things I'm going to be talking to you are probably more at the output/outcome level. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you about some of the results that have tangible gains now. But there's lots of stuff that we're doing. For example, we're working on 7 one-stop border posts across East Africa to reduce the thickness of borders. That's an investment of $100 million.
Right.
Those will be complete next year. So I'm not going to claim any results for those because, we haven't seen any yet. So there's a lot still in progress. And this first phase of TradeMark, we're going till 2016. But the early results, the first thing it's worth saying is our target is to increase trade by 10% for the East African community, above the trend, if you want to get technical. We aim to do that really through increasing the share of intra-regional trade, more trade within East Africa, mm-hmm. and we aim to achieve that through a 15% reduction in the time, the cost to trade across borders. We take that from the point of entry of the ports to the point of destination. So for us, it's Mombasa or Dar es Salaam to Bujumbura, Kigali in East Africa. So that is worth around $17 billion, that 15% reduction. Very important, and the value of the trade induced. And because we're about $500 million program, it's about a $34 impact return for every dollar invested. So what are the kind of early results that make that up? Well, first of all, when Burundi acceded to the East African community, it had 40 different agencies collecting revenue. One of the things that was really important for Burundi was to set up a professional revenue authority and a professional customs service. We helped them to fully establish the legal framework and to fully establish the revenue authority. and I'm really proud to say that in the couple of years, 2.5 years it's been operating, the revenues of Burundi have doubled. Okay, that's actually around 40,000 people per month who now have access to health services as a result of that increased revenue generated by Burundians for Burundians each month. So it's a very tangible gain. That's about $300 million. For our investment, I think now about 16 million. So there's a good example for a landlocked country. Another landlocked country example is the development of the single window system for Rwanda, where we work very closely with the Rwanda Revenue Authority. It's been an early reform. We just introduced it last year, but I'm glad to say already it's reduced time very heavily for the transit because it's all done automatically on an electronic platform. And we think that will save Rwanda around $60 million a year in terms of the cost structures. Uganda, the introduction of a new customs system, Azikuda World, we upgraded it, put in some reforms around the clearance systems. Richard Kamajugo from Uganda Revenue Authority tells me that clearance times are reduced by 50% to Kampala already. Customs revenues set to rise by 20%. Those are just a couple of the examples. Another one is working on non-tariff barriers, an online and SMS system for folks to report non-tariff barriers with the Tanzania Chamber of Commerce and Industry, working very well. And in South Sudan, the newest nation in Africa, we've just started operations. We've helped to establish the new customs service there. And I'm glad to say there's been a tenfold increase in customs revenue in the year and a half that we worked with them. So these are really good, I think, tangible gains made for East Africa through East African institutions. And our approach is very much a partnership approach. And we only work with institutions that really want to see that reform happen. And it's been a successful formula so far.
Impressive results.
Thank you.
$1 invested, $3-4 in return. It speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Now, have you found any magic formulae or best practices that could be emulated, could be replicated in other regions in Africa, which have worked in East Africa, maybe can work in West Africa or in Central Africa, or maybe they can be a source of inspiration for other regions across the world?
Well, of course, I mean, all of what I'll say is caveated with the fact that we work with a small regional economic community. The East African community is made up of 5 member states. Now, soon to be 6 with South Sudan. But that's small compared to, say, ECOWAS or, COMESA. They're much larger, and there's overlapping issues. So a lot of the things that I'm going to say are slightly conditional because it is a smaller regional economic community. But I think what we've really learned is that the secret is really partnership and really working not in a traditional patron-client role or donor-recipient role, but very much looking for the win-win, looking for the partnership and having flexibility. I established TradeMark really to try to be a flexible, private sector-oriented institution. So it means we can do things much faster. If a partner wants to do something with us, we can give a decision within a couple of weeks. It doesn't take months and months or years for the approval processes. So there's that speed and flexibility. I think the other thing that we've really learned is that when you look at, say, a problem like a border post, where the huge delays occur to trade costs, we're able to combine the hardware and the software investment. So it's about rebuilding the border post, thinking about the traffic flows, the ease of movement, thinking about women traders, small traders, so they can get easy access through the border. But then it's about actually changing the management methods, creating IT systems that can deal with that. So to me, that hardware-software thing has been really, really rather important. I mean, the other thing I think that, again, I mean, slightly unusual, but I think it is quite important, is that concept of looking at regional reforms through a national agenda. In the end, actually regional institutions implement nothing. They set policy, and policy is very important, so is regulation. But actually the implementation always happens in the capitals in the member states. So we take the approach that we really need to be close to our partners. So we have country offices and country programs for each country that are very different. So in Kenya, for example, our country program is around $90 million. A lot of that is on the Port of Mombasa as a key point of entry.
Right.
Our program in Rwanda is a very different type of program, again around a $60 million program, focusing on the needs of a landlocked country and trade logistics. So I think those are some of the lessons I think that we've learned. But I also think in a way creating the mechanism itself as a quite an innovative platform to blend country level and regional level finance. And we have 8 different donor agencies now working with us. That's actually a really good way to reduce the transaction costs for the partners. So that I think is another aspect.
So speed, flexibility, an intelligent combination of regional but local, anchoring this changes at the local level, and hardware and software. Let me pick up on the hardware-software part. As you know, the WTO is currently negotiating an agreement on trade facilitation, essentially cutting down the costs of goods and services crossing borders. TradeMark East Africa has been a big advocate of facilitating trade, both at the hardware level with infrastructure. Of course, you need to improve the harbor, you need to improve the roads, you need to improve the customs offices, but also by improving the software, which is what the WTO agreement on trade facilitation would do. Yeah. How does TradeMark East Africa see the WTO trade agreement on trade facilitation?
Well, I think it's very important. And I mean, when I look at the portfolio of 200 projects, you've got to think where you get your biggest impact. Okay, you've got to look at IRRs, internal rates of return, and do some real analysis of where you're going to get the big gains. Some of the biggest gains for us are in trade facilitation. And I think the agreement is really important. I think we proved that actually through doing things like helping to harmonise border procedures, work on improved customs systems, think about trying to get rid of and eliminate non-tariff barriers, the issue of standards harmonisation. These are all areas with very high levels of return. So, for East Africa, where I work, I think the governments and the private sector really welcome it. And one of the things I didn't say earlier is that one of our key partnerships, of course, is with the private sector. Because, in the end, it's the private sector and East African citizens that have got the most to gain. So you've got to work at the demand side of the equation. And when we've asked the private sector, what is the thing that really stops you growing your business, creating jobs, improving prosperity, it is those issues. It is things like the thickness of borders, customs, and the problems with those issues. So I think the trade facilitation agreement is surely a win-win for everyone, in my view. So I do really think that countries will gain a lot from that, and we've done a lot of analytics on looking at that kind of impact, and as I said, very high levels of return.
Now, of course, if you're dealing like you're dealing with landlocked countries, the success of your reforms, the success of your or in you reducing your the thickness of your borders depends a lot on your neighbors doing the same.
Absolutely.
And this has been a core message that the WTO has tried to send through arguing that this is a typical example of a win-win multilateral deal. Now, what advice could you give our negotiators to convince them on the importance of the multilateral or global dimension of this deal?
Well, I mean, maybe rephrasing it in a different way, I guess, is, let's just get practical, all right? So you're in Rwanda, okay, and you're bringing goods over 2,000 kilometers from a port of entry. Now, obviously, your costs of trade are largely outside of your control. Okay.
Right.
So, President Kagame, His Excellency, actually did analytics. He worked with his private sector federation, sent one of his representatives on a lorry truck from Mombasa all the way through to Kigali, counted the non-tariff barriers, counted the cost structures, wrote a report, presented this to the heads of state summit, and that had a big impact because I can't recollect the exact figure, but I think around 70-80% of that cost structure was outside of his control. Now that's really what it's all about. It's about understanding the choke points to get your goods from a point of entry to really the point of destination and the other way out. And we've done a lot of analytics on this in East Africa. We did a big corridor diagnostic study that looked at the main issues, and it's really the ports, the borders, some of the regulatory soft side issues, and these are areas that need to be addressed. And the impact of addressing those is very high.
Let's hope that a lot of leaders around the world would follow the example of President Kagame and ask their officials to list the entire set of obstacles to from entry point to exit point, as you rightly described. Let me, Frank, ask you a final question. TradeMark East Africa has done a lot of work on standards. Standards, which is a type of non-tariff measure, which is for many developing countries a real obstacle to take advantage of trading opportunities. What is the magic formula that can work, the advice that you can provide to dealing with standards, and in particular perhaps private standards, which are, as we know, proliferating?
Yeah. I mean, I think our approach is try to be really pragmatic, okay? What we've done is, I mean, first of all, we engage with all the standards bureaus in East Africa. And, you know, I was delighted when the DG came and visited, and we went to the Rwanda Bureau Standards and the Kenya Bureau Standards. So we engage with each country, and we very much look at how we can support them to deliver standards better. Then we worked very much with all of them to think about mutual recognition of some of the standards at a regional level. And that's been very, very important in terms of moving the whole agenda forward. But I think we, you know, as part of that partnership, we all said, how are we really going to impact with thousands of standards out there? Let's look at the trade basket and prioritize the standards that we're looking at. And I think that's been a real breakthrough. I really commend my team that have worked with all of our partners across East Africa. So, for example, I think this last year we've worked on 28 standards, and that will unleash, we hope, you know, really good levels of trade, and around, I think it's around $350 million. And one of them, edible oils, that I think is coming through very soon. You know, it's billions of dollars of trade within East Africa. So we've taken quite a pragmatic approach. I think with private standards, we take your point, and what we've really tried to do is to make sure that those private standards are fully aligned to create more of a level playing field with the regional and international standards. We have seen proliferation of that a little, but you know, we very much worked at the regional level to bring all our partners around the table on those issues. So, for example, we've worked with the Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya. That's really been looking at that issue right across the region.
Frank, I take 3 lessons that I would describe with P's, 3 P's that I get out of this dialogue with you, if I may.
Okay.
Pragmatism, prioritization, and partnerships. I think these are 3 very good messages that you have left us with. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you to TradeMark East Africa for the work, and to all of you, thank you very much for watching WTO Forum.